Yes.
This is about the shark, which you guys know is my graduate work. And so I'm kind of giving you a quick and dirty introduction to the themes that exist in my current body of work, which are mainly comedy and social critique, and sort of a little bit of a history of that, kind of where my work is coming from. So to like think about what I love about comedy, what I love about jokes, is if I tell you a joke and you vaguely remember the punchline becomes enough of a trigger for you that you then can laugh at the joke all over again. So like, how many ADD kids does it take to screw in a light bulb? Anybody?
43.
Let's go ride bikes. So like, then it becomes let's go ride bikes, and then it becomes bikes. And that's kind of how jokes work. Like the best jokes, you don't remember the whole thing. You just remember one little part of the thing, and that's enough. And to me, that's how a lot of conceptual artwork works as well. You don't need to remember the whole huge piece. You just remember this little bit of it, and that makes the impact on your life. And that's how artwork can be socially impactful. So then we'll go pretty fast through this. So the title of The Shark is The Theoretical Probability of Life in the Heart of Something Inanimate. So in the beginning there was Duchamp. This is from 1917, and this is a urinal turned this way so that it looks like an altar. And this was, it's over 100 years old, this is still a controversial work of art. Marcel Duchamp had been a Cubist painter of some regard. He came to the US from France and became part of a collective that you could basically participate in an art show if you paid $1 for your submission and $5 for your club dues. And so he entered in this piece, which is a ready-made object, to kind of make fun of all the other artwork that would be entered. And the collective didn't want it, so they like hid it back in a corner so that nobody else could see it. And all the other artwork was hung in alphabetical order around hundreds of pieces. Very few people saw this. And Marcel Duchamp then got Alfred Stieglitz, one of the most notorious photographers at the time, to photograph it, wrote about it in a small magazine, and then apparently it disappeared. Stieglitz probably threw it away. There are now many recreations of this original controversial found art piece. And so it was just a kind of silly way of making fun of like all submissions, everything we allow to be submitted as art. So that's, found as many things, apart obviously from a misdescribed piece of sanitary equipment. It was unexpectedly a rather beautiful object in its own right, and a blindingly brilliant logical move, checkmating all conventional ideas about art, but it was also a highly successful practical joke. You can still see this piece. It's at SF MoMA, it's at MoMA New York, it's in England, and it's everywhere. But they're all handmade recreations of this originally not handmade. Tom Marioni is another, he's a social practices artist, among other conceptual types of work, and he's still alive and in the Bay Area. And his most famous work of art is on Wednesdays. He hosts a bar where he invites people to come over and drink beer, and the name of the piece is The Act of Drinking Beer with Friends is the Highest Form of Art. That's the whole piece. There's no memorabilia of the piece. It's just that. It's just people getting together and drinking beer. It's been going on every Wednesday since 1970. So he's kind of one of the original social practices artists. And he's sort of making a commentary on like how the art world really works. Like what's really important that goes on in the art world? Getting together and drinking beer. So. Felix Gonzalez Torres was more along the lines of Marcel Duchamp. He used a lot of ready-made objects, and he was working in the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic and made a lot of work that is very subtle about his and his partner's relationship as his partner was dying. So these are two clocks, perfect lovers. They normally are like, kind of up like where your clock would be. Out of the way in a gallery, there'll just be these two clocks. There won't necessarily be a label for them, and they are almost in sync, but one is running slightly slower than the other, and it reflects, their lives as they could have been. Supposedly the clocks were started very soon after his partner's death. He made these billboards supposedly it's a photograph of the day that, the last day that his partner got out of bed. But there was no explanation for these. So you got to imagine that you're in a city where, you know, so many people were dying of AIDS, and especially in the art world. And so this was a very common kind of thing for people to be going through. It's like suddenly there would be no other person in their life, and they would be, you know, Felix Gonzalez Torres died of AIDS as well. So this cycle of how death is subtly affecting the community was very visible in his work. And then, sorry, this image is so dull, but these are his most famous works, and they are candy in the body weight of himself and his lover, or one of his dear friends. And you're invited to eat the candy, to slowly take the remnant of that person away with you. So he's not making any of this stuff. He's collecting it and gathering it and representing it pretty much for the perusal of other people. It's kind of in that nutshell. Francis Elise is, I believe, still working. He's I don't remember where he's originally from, but he's working mostly in South America now. And he does pieces about consumerism. So I believe this is a ream of balloons that's just walking down the street. It's attached actually to a shopping cart and him. And he just sort of cycles around until all the balloons collapse, run out of helium, and they sort of suck to him. But his most controversial and famous piece is called When Faith Moves Mountains. He got 500 volunteers in Lima to move a mountain, like physically pick up and move a small mountain. So they're working with the social group and with the environment to just kind of shift things, let's make a change. So if you kind of think of all these pieces, they're answers to a question, what does it take to move a mountain? Can we move a mountain? Or in Felix Gonzalez Torres' case, how do we relate to death? And there's sort of these how do we relate to death? By candy, by consuming. So they become these sort of answers to questions that are posed in the mind of the artist. Tina Segal we're finally up to contemporary times. His work is major the last 2 years. And Tina Segal is known for not having any object whatsoever. Nothing exists. There is no bill of sale for his works. There are no objects created for them. There's no postcards. And supposedly there are no images. And what he creates is performances. And of course, because of the internet and iPhones, people take pictures of his performances all the time and they get put out onto the internet. But he does not actually condone any of that activity. And he makes works that are, for example, his piece of the Venice Biennale was an empty room with a bunch of guards, and about every 20 minutes, one of the guards would say in a loud voice, "This is so conceptual." And that was the whole piece. It was millions of dollars for this piece. But that's what he does. This was The Kiss, it was the floor of the Guggenheim, and two dancers slowly went through the motions of 150 major artworks. The Kiss by Rodin and all these others. So they kind of moved slowly through, and that was the entire piece. So Jerry Saltz, who reviewed one of his works where people actually interacted with you, was that plenty of art has brought me to tears in the past, and after my first visit, I was horrified to learn that I had made this progress, the piece. He'd made the piece cry. So that it's actual human interactions being the concept of it. My work in particular is influenced by roadside attractions. These are the Watts Towers, which are thousands of feet tall and created out of pottery. They're basically made for the community, just as a community act.
Have you ever heard of these
In Watts?
California?
Yeah.
Made by
Simon Rodia.
this guy who decided to start making these, and they turned into these gigantic towers.
Yeah. They're so big they can lift semis up. They can attach chains
What
and
are they?
drive the semi, and the semi will lift.
I realize they're towers, but what are their purpose? What do they do?
They don't do anything.
He just wanted.
He wanted to make a beautiful
He
thing
just
for
started
his
doing it.
community.
He wasn't a schooled artist or
Nope.
just.
His really small here, right about there, you can see the remnants of his actual house, but it's this whole lot in this tiny little part of LA. Very, very poor part of LA. When I went to visit in the beginning of March, we drove in like two white guys and me in our Subaru, and we pull up at about 4:30 p.m. and these ladies that are sitting there are like, "You guys must be from out of town." You know, nobody around here drives a Subaru. I'm like, okay, all right. So it's a very, very dangerous place. This is the beer can house, which you guys have seen some of my work before. This is a major piece for me. This guy decided after he retired from being an upholsterer for the trains, for the train railways, that he wanted to cover his entire house in beer cans in different capacities. So the whole inside and outside of the house is covered in beer cans. And apparently really only 4 people contributed to the drinking of the beer. His wife and their neighbors. And it's now a National Historic Site.
That's a lot.
This is the Orange Show, which is another case where a guy bought a house, bought a lot, and then decided to dedicate his life to the promotion of oranges for good health. So he built like a whole circus around the orange and how wonderful vitamin C is. Like, so they're just these just gentle, benevolent, like, here's this thing I thought I should make for you guys so you can come see about oranges. You know, they're very, roadside attractions to me are just this perfect example of being able to be a social artist without like there being a construct of the art world. You're just doing something because you can. Well, it didn't like my, QuickTime didn't like my image of the skull with the bottle caps.
Oh.
But, so to get back to the real art world, there's a guy named Damien Hirst who, when I was 18, he was in his late 20s, and there was a group called the Young British Artists. They are now not so young anymore. In fact, their kids are all your age, which is great. But they're still hot in a lot of ways. And he made this piece, which is called For the Love of God, which is a real human skull that he bought at a junk store, covered with some of the world's most precious diamonds, including one of the world's most perfect diamonds in the middle of the forehead. So it's millions and millions of dollars. I don't believe it is ever actually sold, but they keep rumoring that somebody's interested. And it's just, the whole thing about it is that it's just commercial. It's very pretty, it's very resplendent, but like how many people who get to look at that know that those are real diamonds and understand the worth of it. Whereas with mine, this is made out of bottle caps. We all know what bottle caps are and how bottle caps work and what they're for. It's kind of that difference between the social practice in the fine art world and the roadside attraction. In the fine art world, things are kind of convoluted and hard to understand, and then there's roadside attractions, which are just silly and fun and interesting to be around. So I've been making parodies of Damien Hirst's work for a while, but I'm more inspired by this guy. This is Mr. Imagination, who was a Chicago, Illinois artist and eventually ended up in Atlanta, who covered everything he could in bottle caps and had many, many, many shows. Was very, very popular, made lots of music. He had a bottle cap covered guitar that he would do things with. And he was just there to share his enjoyment of what he was making. For me personally, I've always found a lot of enjoyment in the stimulation of zoos. So like I love art galleries and art museums, but I spend a lot more time and I'm a lot happier at the zoo. So I go to natural history museums, I go to zoos, and that's where I actually get my inspiration to make things. I don't really get it from the fine art world as much as I've studied and spent time in that world. That's not where my inspiration comes from. I especially love humongous dioramas, and that's where I got the idea for making piñatas. This is the work of Richard Ellis, who is actually a fairly notorious animal illustrator, but when he was in his 20s, the Smithsonian needed a new blue whale. And so he's like, I can make a blue whale. And so he made the fiberglass blue whale. At the time, there were no pictures, no photographs of what blue whales look like in the wild. All they had were photographs of dead ones. And, taxidermy mounts of dead ones. So he created the kind of the icon of what we think a blue whale looks like moving in the water because of like his ingenuity and then creating this whale that hung in the Smithsonian until 2002. I became obsessed with piñatas, partially just because they're fascinating and fun, but because they're also similar to the bottle caps. They're something that we kind of have already had interaction with. We all know what a piñata is for. We all kind of get that you smash it open. It has a cultural context that anybody can enjoy and appreciate. And so I found this, I knew about this work called The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of the Living, which is also a Damien Hirst piece, like the skull covered in diamonds. This is a 14-foot tiger shark preserved in formaldehyde that was commissioned to be the most expensive artwork ever made. It wasn't commissioned for subject matter or type of thing. The Saatchi Foundation offered to pay him to make the most expensive piece of artwork ever, and so he created this.
How
And
thick is that glass?
what?
How thick is that glass?
Very thick. It's the formaldehyde that causes it to be blue, but it's like glass, about 3 inches thick.
I mean, it's cancerous material.
This is the face of that shark, and you can see it even in this, not very good image, that it's rotting. The formaldehyde wasn't the right, ratio to actually preserve the specimen, so it began to rot and decompose inside of there. So they actually then went out and found another female 14-foot tiger shark and made a new one very recently. The image over there was of that shark's face. And one of the reasons that I was also interested in creating something like a piñata is it's meant to go away. It's meant to be redistributed and torn apart, disappeared. Whereas his concept is that this thing will be preserved forever. Mine is that it won't be preserved at all, that it's a temporary thing. So, ta-da, shark! You guys get to see it in real life. So, my title is the opposite of his. How to make a shark. So I get cardboard tubes. I tape them together, I paper mache them, and this is the original one that I built. This is actually the third. I get to paint them, which is actually the best part. And then this first one took a ride with me down to Portland. So it's riding in the car, and it's out on the table. And then I began to cover them in the tissue paper, and that's the part that actually takes forever, like days to cover this in the tissue paper. So that's the original one, and then it's hanging in Leslie Groves Park on Christmas. My cousins got to try out smashing the first one. They thoroughly enjoyed it. And then I took the second one went to Boston with me. He got smashed open in graduate school. And this is actually a photographer who came down from Maine, who also graduated from Hanford High School. He ended up taking home a little baby shark for his kid, and that's it. So.